everyone. I think this is the most exciting time of the year. When the Charlotte City Council starts working on the budget, it just feels like a new day. It's like Christmas, you know? Not in a bad way, in a good way, Christmas, because we get an opportunity to talk about what's important and what things we need to do in the community. So I'm calling the first City Council Budget Workshop to order, and I would like to begin with our introductions of those joining us. We'll start with those that are virtual with us, and we will, I know that Mr. Driggs is chair and Ms. Ajmir vice chair, but if you would identify your role on the budget committee when you do the introductions, that would be very helpful. So let's start with our council members at large. Mayor Pro Tem, introductions, please.
Yes, good afternoon, Julie Iselt, Mayor Pro Tem and committee member.
Greg Phipps, at large and committee member.
All right, I believe we now go to our district representatives.
Malcolm Graham, District 2.
2 comes before 1 now. I'm Larkin Eggleston, District 1.
Charles Picari, District 6.
The new map, Larkin.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
6 comes before 5 now. Good afternoon, everyone. Matt Newton, District 5.
This is Ed Driggs, District 7 and Committee Chair, and I hope we'll do better with numbers during the budget process than we just did. Thank you.
Thank you. And could we, and is that everyone that has been introduced? And I'm Vi Lyles, and I serve as mayor. I'd like to now have the staff that supports us introduced. We'll start with those that are on virtual today. Yes, sir, Mr. Attorney.
I'm Patrick Baker, City Attorney.
And now those that are joining us in the room 267, Madam Clerk.
Stephanie Kelly, City Clerk.
Marcus Jones, City Manager.
Ryan Bergman, Budget Director.
Teresa Smith, CFO.
All right, these are the key staff people that will join us over this. I believe that we will have other council members joining us virtually as we continue the meeting. And so with that, I'm going to begin with the introduction of the city manager, who will give us an overview of today's session. Mr. Jones?
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. So it is that time of year where we start to dive into the budget. One thing that's different this year than in previous years is that when we held the annual strategy meeting, it was actually in the fall as opposed to in January. And that was due to the fact that we would have this election cycle during a budget development cycle, which is very unique. And I'm not sure where we are with this election cycle, but we'll continue where we are with the budget cycle. During the fall annual strategy meeting, one of the things that came up was this concept of not having a lot of changes in the budget. That's the upcoming budget. So what do I mean by that? We have a great team in budget and finance, and for the most part, when we put together a budget, it's structurally balanced, and you know what that is. That's the ongoing revenues match ongoing expenditures. But we also do it not just for the upcoming fiscal year, but for the next fiscal year too. So the budget that you approved for the current fiscal year basically was structurally balanced for the FY23 fiscal year also, with one exception, and that is we didn't have any additional salary increase built into it, because that's really a policy decision by the council. So during the fall strategy session, one of the things that we discussed with the council is, for the most part, having FY23, the upcoming budget cycle, to pretty much be the same as it was designed when you approved the FY22 budget. And if you recall, back then we said we could do everything that was a 1 year out, with one exception. We would have to factor in some type of compensation increase, which got us into this concept we call a gap, when you have expenditures exceed the revenue that's coming in. Again, the conversation, we had terms like a continuing resolution and things of that nature. So what we've been doing over the course of the last several months is to keep you updated where we are with revenue and expenditures. And the budget director, Ryan Bergman, will give you an update from where we were in October to where we are now. Unfortunately, we still have that gap, but typically this time of year, we have a gap and we are able to work through it. I would say that on the size of this budget, I would not call it significant. I won't make eye contact with Ryan right now, but it's something that we tend to find a way to close that gap. Also, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we do is during this budget season is focus on compensation. And it's interesting, part of what we'll do this first session, and I know we've mapped out 4 hours, I guess until 4 o'clock. That's not our desire today. We want to just make sure we update you where the revenue and expenditures are and give you, yes, Mr. Graham, give you a snapshot of what's happening in terms of compensation. And we'll talk a little bit about retirement, the challenges that are there, and just a bit about our workforce. A few years ago, we talked about just some of the demographics of our workforce, just to give council a better feel of what we're addressing. Before I turn it over to Ryan, I do want to talk just a little bit about the workforce. I'm so proud of our employees and what we have been doing during this pandemic. Unlike other jurisdictions, we have 75% of our employees that are operational. They could not have a hybrid work schedule. They could not work from home. So they have been working through this pandemic. And some of this challenges came up Monday as we started to talk about the bus system. And we talked a bit about it's not necessarily, getting buses, but just having individuals who can actually operate those buses. And so I want to commend our team of almost 8,000 employees, because again, 75% of them never stopped working, never had the opportunity to be in a hybrid workforce. And those of us who had an opportunity to be in a hybrid workforce still had all the other challenges that come along with COVID. So one of the things that we do want to do is make sure that in this budget, we take into account the environment that we're in. And there have been terms like the Great Resignation. And so we are not immune from that also. Ryan, I won't, jump in front of his presentation, but there'll be some data points I think that will alarm you in terms of what we're facing in terms of retaining and attracting talent. So one of the things that I think it was you, Mr. Driggs, who said, no surprises, Marcus. So one of the things one of the reasons we wanted to start off with compensation is because we need to continue to attract and retain employees. And I think just doing a typical compensation increase is not going to be enough. So we wanted to make sure we talked with you about some of the challenges that we're facing. We've talked a little bit, I know in one committee meeting last week, morale came up. I don't think morale is an issue just for the city of Charlotte. I think cities across the country, across the world, private sector, public sector. So what we've been doing, and me personally, have been intentional talking with employees, whether it's the public safety pay plan, which Ryan will talk with you a bit about today. 3 years later, what's the results of some of your approvals for us to move forward with trying to close some gaps in terms of compensation? We have a team of wonderful people that we call the Queen's team that we've spoken with, and they really reflect some of the issues that are happening within the organization. And it wasn't necessarily that people don't like working for the city of Charlotte. It is just they want upward mobility, they want opportunity, they want to be recognized for the work that they do. And Sheila will talk a little bit about the culture that we are creating here. So normally you have a conversation about numbers and things of that during a budget session. We will have that, but I do want to pivot back to the fall, which was more or less not big changes from FY22 to FY23, but a focus on closing that gap, which included some type of compensation increase. And I'll, before I turn it back over to the mayor and to Ryan, I just would say one final thing is that our employees are no different than any other person in the community. They want to be compensated. They want a place to live. They want to be able to travel to work, and they want upward mobility. So part of the focus today is to just do a little bit of level setting about what we have, what some gaps may be, and to have that compensation conversation at the beginning, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Driggs, do you have any comments before we begin the staff presentation?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just say briefly, the committee did look at the proposed work plan. I reported on that already, the schedule for 3 workshops. And we also had a chance to preview some of the information we're going to see today. We are supportive of the staff's approach and the work they've done. And I would just say personally to the manager's comment, the compensation conversation is going to be tricky this time. I mean, I just say this for my colleagues. We're in an inflationary environment. We're in an environment of job market shortages. So juggling that, thinking about how much to charge for health benefits and so on is going to be, in my mind, one of our big challenges for this session. But that's all I'll say for now, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bergman, would you like to go ahead and start us off?
I will, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ryan Bergman. I'm the Budget Director. You'll hear from me a couple times today. I promise the next couple workshops will be a little less of me. I did want to thank Chairman Driggs and the Budget Committee for helping us frame the schedule. They made some what I feel are really good adjustments to our plan, helped me frame this presentation specifically as well, and so we can get started. So a couple of things we'll do in this one. As the manager said, we want to give you an update on the FY23 budget outlook, our 2 big revenue sources and how those are looking. And then the manager calls it a gap. I'm going to call it a challenge, a little bit more optimistic than him. But it is fairly typical of recent years, and there's already plans in motion to try to address some of it. The next workshop, as you'll see at the end, is heavy on capital and CIP. We'll have our CFO talk about the steady state. But I did want to give a quick update on that in this one, just so everybody understands that it looks like we still are on track. And then finally, I'll end with the current plan that went through the Budget Committee on the committees and the workshops for this year's cycle. So when we start a budget development process, we have these 3 tenets that allow us to essentially go into the cycle in reasonably good shape. Unlike some other cities throughout the country as they went through this pandemic, I feel like we were able to fare a little bit better because of decisions that this council and past council has made to keep us in reasonable financial shape, including our reserves, including the fact that we don't use one-time revenues to solve budget challenges in the general fund. And the fact that rather than spending all of our capital capacity and having future councils worry about generating new revenue, we have a steady state affordability model, so we don't have to automatically increase taxes every time we come to a new bond referendum. So I'll start with this, and this was what the manager alluded to with inflationary pressures. So what this is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and you'll see about 10 years of data for the South urban consumers on the CPI, Consumer Price Index. And, you know, the trend is very striking and noticeable. So you'll see that we've been approaching the 6 to 7% range. And so I want to talk a little bit about everything getting a little bit more expensive, why it causes some additional pressure on us because it impacts quite a bit of our expenditures, but doesn't impact the biggest revenue source we have. But first, the good news. Of course, with the CPI going up, with more and more spending, more consumer spending, sales tax is the biggest beneficiary. So sales tax is the second biggest component of our general fund budget. And we tried to keep these slides similar to what we went through the last couple of budget development process. So you'll know that calendar year 2020 line, that's horizontal. And then for each month through calendar year 2021, it shows how we compared to the previous year. So we finished extremely strong in FY21, which allows us a little bit of a surplus that will go into PAYGO in this upcoming budget. And then the first 4 months, which are the only data points that we have right now for sales tax in FY22, are extremely good, as you'll see. So I will say that Dr. Ndem Tazafor, who is here, is our economist. He's been our economist for a few years now. When we went through the worst of the pandemic and I was running around with my hair on fire, Dr. Tazafor kind of calmed us down, gave us a good projection, was strikingly accurate. So we're going with his projections on these sales tax and property tax numbers, but you can see that we do anticipate pretty good growth in sales tax compared to the previous year. So property tax, as I've mentioned in previous presentations, this is the one that's a lot less responsive to changes in the market and what's going on. So of our property tax that we get, 85% of it is real property, aka your home or your business. And why that's notable is because the inflationary pressures that are out there, the cost of housing in the city and the county, some of that is national trends, of course. But what's unique about North Carolina is we don't actually get any new revenue from that value. And so you have about 55% of our general fund budget that isn't seeing any benefit from some of the inflationary pressures or the home values going up in this region. So what we do get each year, that 1.5 to 2.5%, is around new businesses, new homes that come onto the tax rolls. So that's pretty typical of recent years. We will see an uptick in vehicle value, of course, which I'm sure everybody noticed. What you end up with is a projected growth rate that's fairly similar to recent years and our history in Charlotte. So that gets us to our budget challenge. So we do everything off of the previous year's budget as our starting point. So this is in the general fund. You'll see $27.8 million is our projected new revenue above last year's level. And then on the right, you see, without any new enhancements in the general fund, what we would expect it to cost to keep our service. Based on committee feedback, I'll address a couple of these. The annualized last year's actions, what that means essentially is we don't always budget for 12 months of something in the last fiscal year. So a good example is not all of our salary increases take effect July 1st. So if our salary increase for somebody because it's, the time they join the city is in January, then we had only put 6 months of that increase in the previous budget. And so now we need 12. The cost of service growth, that's a lot of the contractual services, things like that we need to do to continue to provide existing services. And that's an area where the inflationary pressures really impact us. Benefits growth, we'll have a different presentation about healthcare a little bit later, talking about some of the cost drivers there. This also includes retirement systems, the 3 different ones that our employees are part of, and the increases that we now expect. And then the typical salary increase, to the manager's point, when I talk about a typical salary increase, that's the starting point in a typical year. So what that would mean is that for general employees, it's about 3%. And for sworn employees, it's 1.5% and a step. Now, in functionality, what that means for sworn is they usually get about 4 or a little bit more because some people are topped out and some people have a 5% step, some have a 2.5% step. But the overall point is that's what we would have to build off of. So this is a similar challenge to recent years. We've been working with departments for several months. We're always trying to figure out ways that we can provide the same service with less resources, whether it be consolidations, things of that nature. And then beyond that, we of course try to stick with all of our core services and try to work at the fringes a little bit to try to solve the gap. So a little bit on the CIP. As I mentioned earlier, we put into the last budget 4 bonds in our bond cycle, just as a draft plan. They were all $198 million. We expect that to actually go up. And so what we'll do is our CFO will provide to the committee an update and then to the workshop for workshop 2. And then we should be able to talk about capital priorities at the next workshop. And so this is another way to look at this. We're in FY22 right now. We're planning the FY23 budget. And so while we have a long-term capital plan, what we're really looking at in this upcoming budget is City Council gets to populate a bond. And so for many people on council, this would be the first completely full one that you're able to do, having ended the Big Ideas capital program in 2020. And just to plug, if you want to see the starting point that we had talked about and put out there last year, this is located in the budget. All of these can change in the next budget workshop by council, including potentially existing capacity. We'll have some cost updates on some of those road projects, things of that nature. So we'll talk more about that at the next CIP. And we did have some highlights from it. These are where this upcoming budget is where some of the things we talked about last year would start to take effect if council does approve that capital plan, with maintaining that higher level of affordable housing and then doubling and tripling some of the programs that you guys are consistently advocating for and talking about. So for this presentation, I'll leave it at this. This is the workshop schedule, which has been adjusted based on committee feedback. I won't go over today's workshop since the manager already did. But the next committee will be heavy on CIP and then also a focus on transportation capital investments. Specifically, some of the things mentioned include sidewalks, street lighting, pedestrian safety, talking about some of the backlogs and trying to attach budget dollars to what the average project would mean. So we can really try to put some context around that when you go into that budget workshop discussion, which would be about CIP priorities. And then the third committee and workshop, what we had talked about doing this year is having the enterprise funds come to the committee, which would be a dedicated committee meeting, and then we'll send the whole council, of course, those presentations, and then at the workshop, we would have it be more focused on any real key points from those enterprise funds, but also Q&A, things you guys would like to focus on for the enterprise funds rather than repeating those same presentations. And then we'll also have a discussion at that last workshop about some of the technology investments that are coming up. So with that, I will stop for any questions that council may have.
Mr. Jones?
So I just wanted to, if I didn't say it the first time, I'd say it now, that we couldn't have our budget in better hands than Ryan Bergman and his team, as well as the finance department. One thing that Ryan brought up on slide 9, I just want to reiterate a little bit, and it has a lot to do with this council, and it has a lot to do with the budget and finance team. We were able to basically show you 4 bond cycles essentially a year in advance. So instead of you seeing this for the first time during this budget development process, at least you had a taste of this a year ago. The other thing that's very important is that this has been established with no tax increase. Typically, you had a series of bond cycles, and they were contingent upon raising the property tax at some level. So in other words, we didn't take away your flexibility to do whatever you'd like to do in order to fund these bond cycles. And I think what else is very important to reiterate or mention again is that in these cycles, we have the planning fund. What's the right term for that, Brian?
Advanced planning
The
fund.
advanced planning fund, so that we can have better estimates of these projects, so that we don't have, and I'll just be the first one to say it, so you don't have another Cross Charlotte Trail. So what we've done in these 4 bond cycles, again, did it without a property tax increase, made sure that we have designs before we get something that we actually put in front of you, and we feel good about you having had a year basically to look at these, as opposed to us just putting it in your face for the first time during this budget cycle. So Mayor, I just wanted to read it, to talk about that.
All right, so questions from the council. I want to recognize Mr. Driggs.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, you mentioned there was a surplus for fiscal year 2021 that we put into PAYGO. Do you have an outlook for the final result of 2022 yet?
So 2022, so I'll answer the first part. We do have a surplus. It's about $7 million from FY21 that will go into FY23 PAYGO to continue some of our priorities. We actually just finished a mid-year report that will be on the manager's desk on Friday, so I'm beating him to the punch a little bit here. But we do expect to have a light surplus on the expenditure side, and our revenues, because of sales tax, do look like they will exceed, at least at this point, and that can change, of course, since we're only looking at about 4 months of data on some of our revenue sources. But for the current year, I would definitely say that the general fund outlook is stable.
And typically your assumptions are sort of conservative when you kind of project that challenge, and that's appropriate. Right now, conditions are, I guess, volatile is a good way to put it. So do you have confidence in your ability to foresee where we need to be and to avoid either being overly conservative or falling short?
So I have a lot of confidence, as I mentioned, in our economist, who we try to drive these off of. You know, we'll actually meet with the county in the next probably 3 weeks on property taxes, so I might have a little better outlook on that at the next budget workshop. You know, fortunately, 55% of our revenue being property taxes makes things a little less volatile for the general fund because that's so consistently stable. As far as sales tax, you know, we're fairly confident that the next few data points we get with November and December will be okay. But it may not be the same growth with Omicron and everything there. As far as projecting sales tax, you know, for the next 4 or 5 months, I don't want to put a lot of high confidence on that given everything that's going on from a national trend.
And I think it's worth clarifying, since people who are watching might not know, because of our policy of having a revenue neutral reset in a revaluation, the outlook of a big surge in receipts as a result of a revaluation, which I think is going to happen next year. Is that right, Ryan?
Correct. Not this upcoming budget, but the budget after for us.
Right. But there is no prospect of a bonanza from revaluation because the whole exercise is intended to reset tax rates in such a way that we have kind of a continuity of property tax collections, regardless of movements in the value, in the market value of the real estate base on which it's charged. So, okay, so basically what we're going to be talking about through this process is how big that challenge really is based on some things I think you're about to tell us, and then what our opportunities are to address it. Thank you.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem? Mayor Pro Tem,
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. Ryan, thanks for the presentation. I just have a quick question. Does the 50 million we know is 50 million for housing in the bond, but the other two numbers, neighborhoods and transportation, fluctuate. Is one of them driving the other? Because at that point, then you pretty much just have to plug a number in. So
Yeah.
is one of, if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, no, I guess what I'd say is that the line between neighborhood bonds and transportation bonds is rather similar, and it's about classification. I think the better way to look at it is actually that next slide, which really shows, the actual investments. And you can see, like, an example of a neighborhood investment would be the corridors program in FY23. And the examples of the transportation investments would be, sidewalks and congestion and things like that. So, I mean, they're so similar that it's probably better to just go a little bit deeper and actually look at the programs themselves in that outlook.
And you will do that because, for instance, from FY25 to 27, going from 35 million to 13 million in neighborhoods, I think, one would have to ask, what are we not going to do? So. Yeah, and that's, when we get 2 or 3 bonds out, it's of course extremely tentative at that point. So on that next slide, we do have the 4 bond years, and you can kind of see what the changes are. And at that next CIP, when you talk about capital priorities, there will certainly be a chance for you guys to move those funds around or talk about your priorities and, ideally talk about some of the additional capacity and where you might like it to go. Okay, thank you.
All right. Mr. Phipps?
Yeah, thank you. Ryan, you mentioned a couple of times here already in your presentation that you were generally pleased with the accuracy of our economists' forecast. I was just wondering, I don't recall us receiving any kind of economic outlook from the economists. Of course, I just rejoined the budget committee, so it could have been something that was done in the latter part of 2021. So I was just interested in, I know in the past that I'm familiar with the fact that we did receive an economic outlook or forecast for the next year or whatever, but I guess we haven't done that this time around, or what?
Yeah, so the city economist a few years ago did give a couple of economic indicators reports to the budget committee. It's about timing for the committee. I think it's a great idea for us to start giving you some written reports, maybe quarterly, on the economic indicators, the same way they were looked at. And then, the Chairman Driggs and the committee can decide if they want to go a step further and talk about it during the committee process itself. But I think that's a great idea, and we'll take that as something that we will get to you prior to the next workshop as a Q&A as well.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Phipps? No, you're on mute. I'm good. I see. All right, Mr. Winston.
Thank you. Just a comment and a question. Great to hear about the Advanced Planning Fund and how it's been working well. I know that's something that we wrestled with in past council processes. So thanks for that note, Mr. Manager. And was just wondering, I can take this answer offline, but looking at the split on slide 6, and just kind of thinking about where growth is heading in Charlotte, and particularly around sales tax. Wondering if there are things that we can look at in the future, in future plans about maximizing, the growth in logistics and kind of making sure that we're capitalizing off of, that growth in tax revenue. Like I said, just something that jumped out, and like I said, would love to follow up with budget staff and in the future offline. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Winston. We'll certainly do that.
Are there any other questions before we move to the next presentation? We're going to have opportunities for lots of questions, and I expect, Mr. Jones, it's okay to email Ryan and copy you on any question that comes up in the interim. So council, feel free to know that just send a question to Ryan and copy the manager so that we can track all of the questions Are we still going to do the Q&As and provide that?
Yeah, we'll do a Q&A that we'll get you guys well in advance of the next workshop from any questions here. I should probably introduce our Deputy Director, Marie Harris, who is good at all of the things I'm bad at, and it's a really big list. And so if you want to include her on the Q&As as well, she keeps us organized, and we'll make sure we get everything answered.
I think Ryan just said to me, send your questions to Marie and copy the manager. I thank you. That was a very nice way of saying that. All right. Thank you. So let's move to our next presentation, which is going to be the workforce. Mr. Jones, do you?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I'll start off by saying that there's a little bit of a risk with this presentation in general, but I would ask the mayor and council to bear with us. You know, one of the things and we will be brief on this section, one of the things that I think we don't share enough with you is what we would call maybe the full basket of compensation and all of the opportunities that employees have. I have the privilege each Monday at 11:15 to welcome all new employees to the city, and HR has done a great job of acclimating new employees to our culture. So that's just a little bit to tell you about what we have, but maybe some of the challenges too, based on some data, to set up for the next part of this presentation, which would be compensation then retirement. So I believe I turn it over to you, Sheila. Is that right? You and Brent?
Awesome.
Thank you.
Mayor,
Mr. Cagle and Ms. Simpson, you're up.
Mayor, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'll lead us off. Sheila will take over in a couple slides, and then I'll bring us home on this presentation. A couple things, though. I guess I would be remiss starting any conversation or presentation about our workforce without echoing the sentiments of the manager and saying thank you to all of our employees, our 8,000 employees, for all of the hard work that they've done for many, many years, but especially over the last 2 years during COVID-19. It's greatly appreciated, and we know that it has been challenging for all of us. With that said, I'll also point out that we are going to touch on a few things related to compensation, to benefits, some of the total package. But the next two presentations after this one will be a little bit deeper dives into both compensation and benefits. So you may see a few things that you have questions about. Those questions may be answered in the next two presentations as we jump into compensation and benefits a little bit deeper. Next slide, please, or first slide, please. Oh, wait, I'm controlling it.
It's right here. I'll get it.
Page down. All right. So the purpose, we want to do an overview of our workforce. Really, Ms. Simpson is going to talk to you about who we are, what we offer as an employer. I'll talk to you about the future, what we see as the future for the workforce or for the workplace. And talk a little bit about at a high level, about some of the next steps that we hope to focus on as we go through this budget process and into next fiscal year. With that, I will, one more slide, city at a glance. So I'll remind everyone some of the basic information about the city. We have 20 departments. We have roughly 7,500 to 8,000 employees. On any given day, that number changes a little bit as we hire and as we hire new employees and as other employees leave the city. Generally speaking, at the highest level, you can think about the employee groups that we have in three primary categories: uniformed police and fire, our hourly employees, and our salaried employees. And the breakdown at that very highest level is roughly 37% of the workforce is uniformed police and fire, 38% hourly, and then the balance 25% salaried staff. Now, the reason we talk about this or point this out at the beginning is, as you know, but just as a reminder, each of these three primary groups, they have different pay and benefit packages, or the way their pay and benefits are structured can be different. And as a result of that, as the manager's office and HR work on thinking about how do we attract and retain employees, we have to think about different strategies because they have different career goals and they have different structures in their pay and benefits. With that, I will turn it over to Ms. Simpson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sheila Simpson, Director of Human Resources. And as the manager has said earlier, and also Mr. Cagle, the people are really our purpose. And I want to take time to walk through quickly with you many of the other things, other benefits that the City of Charlotte offers to our employees that we seldom talk about in a large group. So today is a good time to walk you through those. So the people is our purpose. Our mission is to help employees thrive through every stage of their career with us. So we often come here and we talk about compensation and benefit investments. And this year, we will do a deeper dive in the next presentations around both of those subjects. But I wanted to highlight some things that have happened over the past year that you have been very instrumental in supporting us to achieve with our workforce. And a lot of these things are very impactful and provides a lot of stability for our employees. One of the things I want to highlight in particular is that since 2018, we have not imposed any health care premium increases to city employees. And that is a very significant investment in our employees, but it also helps them retain more of their income in their pockets. Okay. Celebrations of public service is something we do very regularly in the city of Charlotte. And many of these things, council members, you may have participated in yourself or you have attended. All of these things are very fun and just engaging activities across the city. There's so many that we could not put everything on the slide, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things that actually happens in the city that some people may not recognize in terms of how people are engaged and how we celebrate our employees on a daily basis. Job training and employee development is something that's been an extreme focus for us over this past several years. And we have many different programs that we're offering to city employees. Over the next coming years, we want to make some improvements to some of these programs. But I do want to highlight a couple that you may know of. We have a co-op program with CPCC that is used to help some of our fleet maintenance organization. We can have employees that are trained and get education experience, and then they also get on-the-job experience over in fleet maintenance. And then also our Charlotte Training Academy. That academy was put in, it used to be called the Pipeline Academy. Sometimes we use both names. That was put in probably about 3 years to 4 years ago. And the whole goal of that was to look into our own community inside of Charlotte and find opportunities to provide upward mobility, access to employment, to great jobs for people who may be underserved in our own community. And in that, we have some testimonials from several employees, but one of them I would like to quote was an employee who came to us as a single mom. She's now working with us, and she said to us that this has been one of the best things that's happened to her in her life, because now she has a career that she can look forward to, and she also has a financial stability in her life. So that's the testimony to the different activities that we have and the impact it makes on our community. We have a learning workforce. We have different type of learning opportunities and different mediums upon which and in which we use learning. So for individual learning, we have a lot of courses that employees can sign up for, but also because we said not 75% of our workforce are field operation employees. Many of them are in vehicles during the day. Many of them are out in the community during the day. They are not quickly able to attend a classroom environment, so we also offer different type of training opportunities to engage them. LinkedIn Learning is one of the most significant ones we've put in over the last 2 years, and you have access to training opportunities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that helps our field employees be able to have the same type of opportunities that other employees have. We often talk about benefits, but I want to highlight a few benefits that you may not particularly know that you have. The City of Charlotte, pays for a lot of things on behalf of the employee so that when you have a need, then you are able to access these benefits, and you can always predict the need. So the one at the top is something I want to specifically highlight. It's called Hospital Indemnity Insurance. And if you are on a medical plan with us, if you are ever hospitalized or you have to be admitted into care at a rehabilitation center, this benefit provides a cash payment to you the moment that you are hospitalized, and that triggers your eligibility for the benefit. So I want to highlight that one because many of our employees might not even be aware that they have that benefit. And the goal behind that is to ease the financial burden when you are at your worst and you need many things in your life. When you are hospitalized, you are struggling. That's a benefit that the City of Charlotte has paid for to provide that insurance to you, and you get a cash payment when you're hospitalized. So I would like to highlight that one. Wellness. I think this is one of the proudest moments we have in HR, is when employees talk to us about their wellness initiatives that has been so impactful in their lives through the wellness strategy that we have imposed over several years. And there are many things listed on this slide, so it's too many to go into, but I just wanted to highlight the variety of wellness opportunities you have, because when we think about wellness, we think about your physical wellness, your mental wellness, your emotional wellness, your financial wellness, your spiritual wellness. And so wellness is encompassing of the whole person, the whole body, and your family. Speaking of mental and emotional wellness, the past couple of years have been very, very stressful for many. And as you all know, we're not in this world alone. COVID has done a lot of different things for us, but it's been very, very stressful on our community, and including our employees. And these are a variety of sources of help that we provide to our employees. And in our employment assistance program, 86% of our employees have engaged in employee assistance over the past year, 86%. And for employees and families, 92% of the new utilization users was in the past year. So that tells you that our mental and emotional wellness needs are high. People are asking for a lot of help and a lot of assistance to be able to adapt to the change that we are facing. And one thing that's important about this is you cannot physically see when someone is in need. So this is a benefit that our employees really do need, and we are so proud to be able to offer it to them, because there's no way we would know that someone would have a need, but they're able to reach out and use these benefits. Retirement readiness. When we talk about we want to help employees thrive through every stage of their career life cycle, we begin it when you start working for us, because we anticipate and we want you to retire one day from us. So as a new employee, you may not know this, but hopefully you do, but in case you don't know, the City of Charlotte provides a contribution to your retirement planning in the form of deferred compensation. So for our police and fire employees, they get a 5% contribution to some form of deferred compensation. For police, they get 5% to a 401k plan. For fire, they get 3% to a 401k plan and 2% to a 457 plan. For general employees, they get a 3% contribution to a 401k plan. In addition, all throughout the years, and definitely twice a year, we provide classes for retirement, And we also partner with the Social Security Administration Office and also Prudential Retirement Systems. They come in and now we're doing it virtually, but we conduct actual financial education training and retirement readiness preparation work so that when you are able to retire, you understand how to use your retirement benefits and the pension that the city of Charlotte is able to offer through being an employer with the state of North Carolina. Community engagement. Our employees are heavily engaged in the community. This is just a sampling of the many things that happens in the community. When you see employees, sometimes they're in uniforms and sometimes they're not, but they're always in our communities. And this is just a small representation of the things that employees are engaged in the community. COVID care. When March 2020 came, our world changed. And it really changed the way we meet. It changed the way we greet. And in many ways, it changed the way we work and the place how we work. And I vividly remember that we were sitting in a room in the middle of March, and Manager Jones called all of the senior leaders together, and he had one message. And that one message had two principles in it. And it was that we will focus on the safe and healthy workplace of our employees, safety and healthiness of our employees. And we will maintain critical services to our community. So with that, we have continued to focus and promote health and safety in our workforce. And with your support, City Council, you have enabled us to do a lot of those things that's on that slide. The one I want to highlight, though, is the one at the bottom. In March of 2020, the unemployment rate was around 3.5, 3.6%. In April of 2020, the unemployment rate jumped double digits. It became 13, 14, 15%, depending on which statistic you were looking at, North Carolina, Charlotte, or the United States. Through all of that, it took until November of 2021 for the unemployment rate in Charlotte to reach what it was in March of 2020. Throughout that time, the city of Charlotte was able to maintain job stability with our workforce. And our employees were not subjected to the unemployment rates going up double digits. So with that, I would like to turn this over to Mr. Cagle to talk about the future of our workforce.
Thank you, Ms. Simpson. So I'll go through these pretty quickly. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so a little bit of national data. This professor, Nicholas Bloom with Stanford University, came out with a study based on survey data that he's been conducting over quite a long period of time. And what he predicts is that about 50% of employees will not be able to work remotely. They have to be present to work. About 40% of employees can and will have a hybrid work schedule, probably 2 to 3 days remote working, or vice versa, 2 to 3 days in the office, about an even mix between hybrid schedule, working remotely and coming into the office. And then there are about 10% of employees who really could work 100% of the time remotely. So taking these and dividing them up 50-50, the employees who cannot work remotely and the other 50%, those that could, I wanted to think about that in context of our workforce. So clearly we do have employees who can work remotely in a hybrid schedule, but unlike the national statistic of about 50-50, we're about 75-25. So about 75% of our employees cannot conduct their work remotely, right? They are field units. They have to be present to do their job. And then we have the other 25% who can and do work hybrid schedules. Very few of our employees actually are full-time remote, but there is a small percentage of that. Most of that 25% that can work remotely are doing hybrid schedules. So a couple things of this. One, we've recognized, I think the world has recognized, that there is value in remote work and allowing for hybrid schedules. There are some dangers to it as well, but clearly it is something that the old paradigm of remote work results in less productivity is not true. The last 2 years have proven that. But the other thing, and this is especially important for us because of that 75%, as an employer, we have to look for more creative and different ways to recruit, retain, and maintain morale amongst our employees who cannot remote work, and that is the majority of our employees. A couple additional challenges. Trends show a national labor shortage. We'll talk more about this. We've talked about this actually already, and we'll continue talking about this. It's especially true in the trades. This was true before COVID came on, and it's only gotten worse over the last 2 years. Inflation is rising rapidly, and that's putting further pressure on hourly wages, on our take-home pay, on how far our dollars go. And the impacts of COVID will continue to affect us in the workplace, in the workforce, and at home. You know, the world has changed. COVID is not over, and its impacts will be felt for a very long time. So some of the lessons. Again, I've hit on these pretty much in the last slide, but I will say I do think it's important to remember that pay and benefits, career advancement opportunities, especially career advancement opportunities, and really the ability to have consistency in schedule become very, very important for the 75% of our employees who cannot work hybrid, who cannot work from home. They don't have that option. So those are some of the things that drive our thinking as we start to think about what do we need to do as an employer to be more competitive, to attract, to retain our employees. Next steps. As always, continue to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in our hiring and in our workforce development. 2, we have to continue to look at making improvements in compensation and health care for our employees. And 3, and this one is especially important, we are looking to establish long-term partnerships in the region, in the community, that will help us create opportunities for recruiting new employees and for career development of our existing employees. That one's going to be important, and we will be talking about that more over the following months. With that, that is the end of the presentation, and I'll turn it over for questions, if there are any.
Questions from the council regarding the presentation on the workforce, future, current and future? Questions? Mr. Winston?
So for the 10% of employees that could work 100% from remote, are we planning on allowing that work to be done 100% from home in the future?
Mr. Winston, you know, as we look at our statistics, it's probably not 10% inside of the city of Charlotte. It's some lesser number, maybe somewhere between 1 and 5%. So the short answer to this is there are some positions that are 100% remote, but we do believe that the best option for the city of Charlotte in general for that 25% of employees is a hybrid schedule. The city has implemented that as part of COVID, and we have already let our employees know of our intention to continue allowing hybrid schedules, but more hybrid and less 100% remote.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the team? I have a couple of things that I would like to, it's maybe a question, maybe a comment. I wondered, I know that the reading that I've been doing around returning to work and change, there have been some key questions or considerations, and one is workers' comp, for example. If you're hybrid, if you're at home, how does workers' comp work? And I'm sure that there are others like that. So as you're doing this analysis, could you give us some kind of comparison of what those factors might be? You know, people say, well, what about your equipment, all of these other things? So that's just something. The other thing that has been a concern to me, and I don't know that this is really, but, you know, to get a CDL, I've understand it's about $3,500. And we have a lot of CDLs, and when you talk about trends and changes and training, I think those kinds of investments are worth it. So I don't know what our current policy is, but I know that we have a number of people that borrow money to do this, and I don't know if those folks come our way, but I would assume that those kinds of skilled trades, as you said, how many of those licenses should we be considering and financing to keep good employees? So just a thought on that?
Yes, Madam Mayor, CDL is, it is a CDL is a very valuable item for employees right now. It is hard to find CDL drivers, and we have acknowledged the need to pay for CDL training so that we can bring employees into the workforce with that training, and they don't have to take on that burden. So we have already started doing that, and we will continue expanding doing that.
And then my final thing, and I've mentioned this to Mr. Jones, I really believe that the 3% deferred compensation that often leads to the quality of life after retirement has been in place as long as I can remember, maybe since it was actually initiated. And I wonder if, again, we are talking about the trends going forward, should we be considering a serious look at what we do for deferred compensation? And I say that because many of our programs that we're talking about staying in place, the opportunity to benefit our employees so that when they do retire, that they have an adequate retirement built up that that we should perhaps contribute to. And I think overall, I know that retirement is an issue, and I know it's a very costly item. So again, we need to begin to think about our contributions for all of our employees and what we're doing in that regard, and just would like to have more information around that as we go forward on this. So those are my comments. I have some other ones, but I'll just send those to Ms. Harris and copy the city manager. And now I'm going to recognize Mr. Phipps.
Yes, Ms. Simpson talked about employee stability during times of the pandemic. I was wondering, in situations where we had departures, did any exit interviews indicate any kind of underlying themes as to why people were leaving, or did not many people leave during this period?
Mr. Phipps, we do have some information from employees who left. Some of the information is that for those, interestingly enough, for those who could work a hybrid schedule, there were some who decided that they wanted to spend more time with their children now that children and the school systems were impacted in terms of how education is being delivered to students. And so some of our feedback was that they wanted to go ahead and become full-time parents so that they could become full-time teachers. And so that's a really reflection. That's a really different dynamic for us. But it really does show how significant a change the world has been seeing in a COVID environment. And so it impacts the whole life of the families, especially with schools and not knowing if schools were going to open again. And so some people made those decisions. And then in our trade areas, the reasons why we lost some of those employees was really, quite frankly, was our employees are competing against the private sector for certain jobs. And some of our employees left us for higher compensation. Mayor Lyles just brought up a CDL, and that's a licensing. However, when you have a CDL, it provides you so much access to other types of employment opportunities. And there are some local employers who are private employers who will come and attract our employees, and we train them. We will train them to become CDL drivers, but they actually do pay more in some of those areas. And so we know that we're facing a compensation challenge with many of our skilled craft jobs. And so that has been challenging for us in COVID.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Graham?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quick question. I know we're still in a COVID environment, and the strain is lessening within the community as well as throughout the state. Have there been any conversations about getting more of the workforce back in the building? And could the manager share with others in the community, other corporations in the community are talking about in terms of returning their workforce back? I know there's been several starts and stops.
Thank you, Councilmember Graham. I think I'm right with this. So I would say as of June of last year, for the most part, everybody returned to work in some fashion. Again, 75% of the workforce not really having that luxury. But what we've done, and I think this works well in the organization, because for all the reasons that have been discussed earlier, whether it's child care or you name it, we've allowed employees to have the flexibility. We want to make sure the work is getting done, but this hybrid work schedule seems to be working for us, even during COVID, and I don't see why we would move away from it, even post-COVID. If we have issues with productivity or getting the work done, that's something to discuss. But I would say that we have, for the essentially, all of us have been back to work full-time, if you will, shortly after the pandemic started.
What impact would that have in terms of our facilities, right? Again, walking through the building is pretty lonely. And we have a lot of space now, and so what's the implication in terms of our facilities and our office needs and equipment? And I mean, how is all that being taken into consideration? And how do we build a uniform team when so many of our members are far and away?
Sure. So, Mr. Graham, what I would say is that it's a combination. I really believe that the City of Charlotte is, at least the municipal government, is built to continue to deliver services during the pandemic. You may recall during the CARES Act funds, we put millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars into all of our buildings, assuming that there would not be a vaccine available. So we would be able to have people in their offices with separation, a year ago or more, as well as now. So what I would say is we're back because we have a hybrid work schedule, and I think for the most part, everybody's coming in a couple days a week. I think that's what we've been doing. Yeah, okay, good. You just don't see everybody in the building at the same time. But as Brent alluded to earlier, we believe building a culture, it's important for us to interact with each other. So the building, we have made the changes to the building. There's flexibility within the workforce, but it's not a situation where folks have not been coming to work. You just don't see 2,000 people in the building each day.
Okay.
Mr. Manager and Mr. Graham, I will say one of the areas that we have seen a positive impact is parking. right? We had a bit of a parking problem pre-COVID when all of our employees came in on this Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and that has been alleviated. Now, as we continue to grow and come back, we could see that come back, but that has been especially good. It's been well managed during this, and hybrid schedules have helped.
And one other thing I'd add, there are a couple examples already of what you refer to, Mr. Graham. One example is our risk management division had previously had rented office space in another building. Because of the use of some of these hybrid schedules and less space, we were able to pull that risk group into the government center. So some of that is going on and saving a little bit of money.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mayor. I would like to hear from the employees when we talk about, and I know we talked about in a strategy meeting, I guess it was 2020 maybe, about 360 evaluations from employees. So I'd like to follow up on that one, but I'd like that evaluation to include their thoughts on remote working. I know that that's a trend, and we might be losing employees because there are other corporations that allow 100% remote working, and there are some folks that are looking for that. So I would like to follow up on an evaluation from the employees to hear what they're saying or how they feel about the remote working. We know that they are productive. I realize there's issues or questions surrounding workers' compensation, but I mean, that's a question that industry experts, I'm sure, have answered. So I would really like to get an evaluation from employees to see how they feel, those employees who are able to work remotely, how they feel about coming back to work, and if that is an opportunity for us to attract and retain other workers or more workers if we're able to offer that option of 100% remote working. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Is there any other question from?
Is there any feedback on that from the manager or Sheila?
Sure. Yes. So Councilmember Johnson, yeah, we can do that. I on the front end, when we did this remote work policy, we got a lot of feedback from all of the departments and the employees, and I believe it's been pretty successful. But we'll go ahead and see how we can quantify that also.
Yeah, I mean, if it's included in a leadership evaluation or 360 evaluation, we talked about that a couple years ago. So if we could hear from our employees, and I know this has been a stressful time for a lot of people, but it would be nice to really hear from the employees to be able to quantify or to evaluate the morale for the different departments and see if there's anything that can be done from a policy level.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Is there
Thank
anything
you.
else? All right. So our next section of work is more about the employee compensation.
Mayor, members of council, this will be a data-driven section of the workshop today. And Ryan will talk a bit about the last few years of the Public Safety Pay Plan and what advancements have been made there. I will say that as we go through this, I've already had a discussion with members of the Public Safety Pay Plan, and there's always more work to do. So we put that out, even at the beginning of this, and there'll be some interesting data points as it relates to some of the different types of employees we have. So with that said, Mayor, I'd like to turn it over to Ryan.
All right. Mr. Bergman.
Okay, so as the manager mentioned, we'll start by discussing the progress in our public safety pay plan and some of the survey data we got back from our peer cities. talk a little bit about general employee compensation. I'm going to put a few data points in there that's going to make the case, I believe, that we are experiencing a national and state trend of resignations and vacancies, and that action may be needed over the next few years to try to begin to address some of the root causes. And that'll, of course, feed into next steps for budget development. So public safety pay plan progress. I'll start by mentioning Delane Honeycutt, who's a HR compensation manager, and myself, and our teams 3 years ago worked with the Public Safety Pay Plan Committee on prioritization of what they wanted to see change so that we could target our investments in the most strategic way. And the thing that kept coming up from them is what drives people out or keeps people is an inability to get to a higher level of pay once you make it to the top step. So we had a 3-year plan for CMPD and fire on increasing that top pay with additional steps, 2 additional steps for police. And what we were able to get to is for police officers, police sergeants, fire captains, fire engineers, we got to 10%. And firefighters were only at 5, which was a strategic decision within the fire pay plan to make it work with the other jobs. So I'm going to show this a couple of different ways. I do want to make sure that everybody understands this is all data we get from other HR departments, other budget offices. So we're as good as that data. We have shared this data with the Public Safety Pay Plan Committee. I won't call out any cities specifically other than Charlotte, but it's our typical peer cities. And what you'll see in this slide here is that first, when you measure what is the change from 3 years ago, how much did we increase the top pay compared to how much other places increased the top pay? You'll see that as far as actual dollar investments, we fared very strong, especially the Eastern U.S. and then national as well for police. So that's police sergeant would be 2 out of the 21, including us, and officer would be 3 out of the 21, including us. For fire, you'll see that captain and engineer, we were towards the top, and firefighter, due to that decision that was made at the outset on focusing on captain and engineer, was a little bit further behind. So now a different way of looking at it. What I'm going to run through on each of these jobs, starting with police here, is what the top pay is now, what the actual median pay is. Then I'm going to talk about what the top pay is comparatively without any cost of living adjustments. And then you'll see how it looks with cost of living adjustments. And so for police officer, firefighter, and fire engineer, this does include 4-year degree pay. We have kind of a unique salary system in Charlotte where for those jobs I mentioned, you get 5% extra on your base pay with an associate's degree and 10% extra on your base pay with a 4-year degree. You'll see that the median pay for police officer is up 13% from 3 years ago. You'll see how we compare in 2019 in the Eastern and the National for officer compared to now. You'll see that now in the Eastern we're up to 2 of 10, and we made a jump of 4 slots in straight up dollar pay. One theme you'll see when you look at these is that once we incorporate the cost of living adjustment, we did lose a little bit of our progress. And so what that means is that compared to our peer cities, the cost of living in Charlotte did increase a little bit more than that peer city group. But you'll see even with the cost of living adjustment pay for both police officer and sergeant, we did make strides on both. And so you'll see that we approached the median for top pay and get past the median actually for top pay, and then cost of living adjusted, we're still a couple slots behind. And that's really because of the cost of living factors that I mentioned. So there's 3 on here. I won't read all of them since you should all have a binder with the information in front of you. But the general theme is that we made a lot of good progress in Captain, where we were able in both the top pay and the cost of living adjustment top pay, we were able to increase 1 for the Eastern U.S. and 3 for national. That's not an error that the top pay and the median are actually the same. There's only a few captain steps, and that means that more than half of them are actually topped out at that 101,242 number, which is 15% higher than it was 3 years ago. Engineer, we have the median pay up about 10% to 77,729. Again, we made some good progress in top pay before the cost of living. Once you factor in the cost of living, we actually lost a slot just because of the way the data shakes out with the cost of living. So, the overall theme for a lot of these is that we made some good progress. Nobody is going to get in front of that committee or stay here and say that, we've completed our mission and we're done. But it's certainly good progress. For firefighter, this was the one that had less of a focus, which is why you see the top pay and the median pay only going up by 10 and 7%. And again, it's a similar story where we made progress in actual pay, but cost of living adjustments was a little bit less. So I did want to show this just to reiterate that this city council and the previous city council has made significant adjustments in top pay in the police and fire groups. And this is outside of a normal market adjustment in their wage scale. This is extra on top of the market adjustments. You'll see that from 2010 to 2017, other than that one for firefighter, we had no adjustments at all. And this is clearly where we fell behind the curve at the top of the scale. However, it's also true that we have begun to address this over the last 5 years with this council. There we go. And then I'll just end on this for public safety. And we're already talking about next steps with them, trying to, again, think strategically, look at everything we can with the public safety pay committees. But if you use just actual average, it's a really good story that the average police officer is 12% up from what they were 3 years ago. The average firefighter is up 10% from 3 years ago. And this isn't taking one police officer and seeing how big of an increase they got, or one firefighter and seeing how big of an increase that. This is the whole data set, which means that we've, through those top pay adjustments, we've really elevated the average pretty significantly for both police and fire. So then turning to talk a little bit about some of the retention issues and general employees. And this is a data-heavy slide, but it's a cool slide from our economist. So let me try to explain it. This is all of North Carolina over the last 6 years or so. And what that percentage, the green bar that it's measuring, is how many resignations in the state for all employers each month. And so, of course, part-time jobs, service industry jobs are always going to be the leading force in increasing that. But you see a 2.5% average per month, and I'll talk on the next slide how we're significantly below that. But you'll see that the trend over the last 6 months of 2021 is very striking. And this really speaks to the overall labor force issues that are going on in North Carolina and in the country, where people are leaving their jobs primarily to find other jobs because there appears to be a labor shortage. So fortunately for us, we do remain fairly low. One of the reasons for that, of course, is we do have a pension system. Once you get into the pension system in any of our full-time jobs, if you want to remain in that, you have to stay in North Carolina. It kind of shrinks the pool a little bit. But either way, we're pretty low at about 0.3 to 0.9% per month. However, as I'll show you on this next slide, we are seeing an uptick similar to all these state and national trends. Oops. So I'll talk you through this. This is really a point in time of late January, early February for the last 4 calendar years. And typically in January, February, we're actually at one of our lower, or I should say one of our higher vacancy rates. And that's because we typically have a lot of retirements in December and the beginning of January. So we're typically a little bit higher, but what you can see here is that each of our groups, you'll see kind of a baseline for where they typically are. And maybe the most striking is the hourly employees, which is typically down in that 7, 8, 9% range, going all the way up to 13.5% as we're having more and more difficulty attracting and retaining some of those employees. I do want to call out fire specifically because it is unique. So it's very low. The reason for that is because we have our own retirement system in fire. And so in other jobs, they can leave Charlotte and go somewhere else in North Carolina and maintain their pension system. But a firefighter has to stay in Charlotte to continue on the progress with the firefighters' retirement system. So because of that, which I mentioned before, we do have a lot less retention concerns with firefighters as some of the other jobs. So one more heavy data slide so you can kind of get the idea of what's really driving some of the increases. And as Sheila mentioned in her presentation, we're seeing higher turnover rates in some of the jobs such as service maintenance and skilled craft specifically. So some examples of some of those would be our sanitation equipment operators, our airport shuttle bus drivers, our utilities technicians, some of those skilled trade hourly type positions that we're having more resignations, presumably to find higher pay in other jobs. And so we have the data that shows that we're having more and more trouble with some of our hourly jobs, certainly more so than we had 3 or 4 years ago. And so maybe similar to what we did with public safety 3 or 4 years ago, the starting point for talking about any future investments, whether it be in this upcoming budget or a multi-year plan or things of that nature, is to talk to the employees themselves. We had a lot of success with that with our public safety positions. And so the idea is we would continue to do that and talk to them about how they would like to prioritize things a little bit. Now, having given the budget outlook before, I think everybody has to understand expectations here, and we're not able to drastically change things overnight. Similar to police and fire, there has to be discussion about a multi-year path and a recognition for it. And so you'll see that for hourly. And then beyond that, with public safety, as I mentioned earlier, we made some good progress. There's still some areas we didn't get to the national median. And so we're going to continue meeting with those groups. They're already meeting, and we anticipate that still being a focus in budget development. So with that, I will stop for any questions. I know that was a lot of data.
Okay, Ms. Johnson?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Mr. Driggs, I'm sorry.
Mr. Driggs?
Thank you, Mayor. So Ryan, I think this reflects things that we kind of generally know from media reports and so on, but when are we going to actually talk about how we respond to this? Like, do you have any idea right now as to where we need to be or what steps we're going to take? But if not, where in our workshop process are we going to be able to discuss exactly where we go from here?
So, Mr. Driggs, what we wanted to do today is to make the case that we have to do something different. And hopefully by the end of the workshop, we've made the case. And so under the direction of the fall, no surprises, I just didn't want the council to think that business as usual and compensation would be enough. So today is the beginning of the discussion there's a bunch of things that we've been talking about, whether it's shift differential, whether it is how we may be able to use some of the stimulus funds, but it can't be for ongoing, right? So it's how do we structure something that can, one, keep us competitive in terms of recruiting individuals, but to me, more importantly, be able to retain the great talent that we have.
So I understand that, and I do think it's important. I'm just concerned that the council is going to want some time when you're at the point of actually being able to offer something to us. So I'm wondering where in our workshop process we're going to have the ability to think about the choices we have to make.
Well, typically, Mr. Driggs, the workshops have not been a place to determine compensation. Again, what I am attempting to do today is get some general acknowledgement from the council that status quo would be very difficult for us to reach the goals that we want to reach.
And one more thing I'd add in is, as far as numbers, Mr. Driggs, to add an extra 1% to general employees, for instance, would be about $1.8 million, if that gives you an idea. But I think it's also important that we don't, as staff, throw out ideas and our prioritization before we go through that employee discussion process that worked last time with the Public Safety Pay Committee.
No, I understand that there's some sensitivity about that, but Mr. Manager, to your point, this is not a business as usual conversation about compensation. And I think the conclusion we reach could have implications for that challenge number we were talking about before. And so I don't want us to be scrambling very late in the process to figure out what our options are in order to carry out whatever you may suggest on the compensation side.
Well, I apologize. I misunderstood you. So, Councilmember Driggs, I intend to bring forth to council a package which would address some of the concerns that we're putting out today, especially around some of the operational employees, which we're seeing a big challenge there, as well as continuing to be competitive with public safety, as well as what we do in terms of our minimum salaries. Minimum salaries, yes.
So that would be in a workshop or at a strategy session, or when do you think we'll have that conversation? Or when you offer your budget?
Correct.
Yeah. Again, I would just like to be sure that we are able to respond to what you propose here, because this isn't business as usual. And, it's going to take some significant steps by us, I think, to adequately respond. And it's going to involve a discussion about issues concerning, what public sector employment is like compared to private sector employment. The Simpson just told us that we were able to maintain our full payroll throughout COVID. Many private employers weren't. So what are the proper benchmarks in terms of deciding how we need to respond to our employment situation? And I'll leave it in your hands, Mr. Manager. I'm just pointing out this is not a business as usual conversation that we need to have.
I agree. Thank you.
Mr. Driggs, I really hope that as those questions come up, that everyone has an opportunity to comment on that, because I do think what you're pointing out is how long and what do you need to know to be able to come to a position that you be acceptable to you as an individual council member, and then what's going to be acceptable. But the manager's recommendation, I know in the past has included his recommendation, but there are also options and choices between it. So I would hope that as he makes his recommendation, we still have that leeway up and down. So hopefully we can continue to have this dialogue, and as he gets closer. If that's the end of your question, Mr. Driggs?
Yes, Mayor, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Winston?
Thank you. It's really interesting seeing, especially the general employees, the turnover rates and where those jobs are kind of categorized, I think to me it definitely puts another kind of focus on the work that this council does around workforce development and building pathways and new opportunities for workforce training in our communities. I mean, you're seeing things like, the skilled crafts, service maintenance, and technicians. I saw a sign on the solid waste vehicle yard, over on Louise Street, asking for diesel techs. And these are jobs that the city needs, but these are jobs, as was said, that we're competing with so many service providers in the city for. So it just reminds me of the work that we're doing in economic development and neighborhood development, how that work really resonates. Something that Mr. Bergman mentioned about fire retirement system, about those firefighters really having to stay in Charlotte, and that means that over time, especially when they are retired and really living on a fixed income, the cost of living increases of Charlotte are particularly felt on our firefighters, legacy-wise. So I hope that we continue to pay attention to that fire retirement system and making sure that we are taking into consideration Charlotte's growth and those costs of living on that system. And Mr. Manager, I know last year during the budget process, we brought up that idea that you mentioned of shift of differentials, and it would seem like during this conversation on employee compensation will be the place to kind of see where we are in that research and kind of a direction that we might be going in with this budget. So with that, those are my 3 comments and questions.
Well,
Thank you.
That's a great observation, Mr. Winston. But I get this retiree employee magazine, and this idea of a cost of living, it's not just in fire, because the state has not approved a cost of living for our solid waste workers, our street maintenance workers, that I can recall in the last 10 years. And so this is something that, as we grow and we see our community changing and aging, I think this is an issue for all of us. I mean, Social Security has increased, but that's sometimes not enough, and when we know the situation, I would love for our employees to be able to get regular cost of living, but that is just not happening in retirement, no matter whether it's under the state system or the fire system right now. So I do want to recognize Mr. Phipps as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I do recall, I guess, back in prior budget workshops and cycles that the manager said that they wanted to do a more detailed and robust review of compensation. And so I'm glad to see that these results are quite positive, even though over time we're faced with other challenges. But I wanted to direct attention to slide number 14, and perhaps Mr. Bergman can clarify for me. Under the police sworn rank, am I correct in viewing this as we had 66 retirements and an additional 66 resignations, or are those numbers intertwined somehow?
No, they're separate.
Wow, okay.
The retirement's similar to what we've experienced in recent years. I think we had 62 last year. Like all other jobs, the resignations were a little bit higher than typical years for police as well.
Great, okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Phipps. Any other questions from the council on this section? I wonder, and I don't know this, a lot of this with 2 years of uncertainty about how to provide child care for your family or elder care. I just wondered, is there any data around that idea of how much, have we learned anything about the instability of child care as an impact on our resignations or or retirements even. If it's too hard, don't worry about it. I just look sometimes at positions where family members have had to swap off work for so many days and uncertainties. I think it's the uncertainty that's really tough for everyone. So just the thought. With that, we need to probably move on to health care.
Mayor, before we move on, I
Johnson,
have a question. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson, I didn't see it, so.
You
I'm
wouldn't
looking
see it.
up.
I'm having trouble with my hand raised function.
Okay.
So thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I just wanted to just reiterate how an employee evaluation would really kind of answer some of the outstanding questions that we have. I wanted to ask Ms. Simpson about the turnover rate and ask her what is an average employee turnover rate or a healthy turnover rate for an organization?
Sorry, Ms. Johnson.
That's okay.
Our turnover rate has increased over the last year, but generally we're around 4% turnover rate.
Right. So that's for us. But I mean, as far as the industry standards, what's a goal for an employer to strive for? What would be considered a healthy range, or those companies like the top 100 or 500 employers? What's a good employee turnover rate?
Well, I'm not certain I can answer it that way. It's difficult to compare organizations, especially different types of organizations. But what I can do is try and do a little bit more research to give you an indication of where those turnover rates are trending by industries. It's difficult to compare different organizations out of different industries. The communications area where you have a 311 operations center, typically call centers have a higher turnover rate than other jobs, and the city of Charlotte has turnover in our 311 operations. This year, I think, is lower than it's been in other years. We also have different types of call center operations. We have one in police, we have one in fire. So it's difficult to give you an answer today, but what I can do is do a little bit more analysis to try and get you an answer of what you might be able to anticipate by type of industry.
Okay. And I'm sorry, while you were answering, I just Googled that. And I know that that's very general and very simple, and that's kind of what I was looking for, just a simple answer, so I have an idea of where we're falling in. So if our rate is considered high, I think this is where an employee evaluation would really help us to answer those questions. Mayor, you asked about childcare. How is that impacting? Those are the kind of information or statistics that we might be able to gather from an employee evaluation. It's, when we talk about we want to break the status quo, it may not just be about money. Different people are motivated by different things. So I think an employee evaluation, if we start now, then we would be able to have that information before we approve the budget. So again, I just want to reiterate, I think an employee evaluation, hearing from the employees, what this generation is looking for in an employer. I think this would be a great time to hear from employees so that we can be competitive and retain employees at as much as possible. Thank you.
So what number did you get when you Googled?
Lower than 10% is a healthy turnover rate across the board, and that's Monster. But that's the recruiting giant Monster. But again, that's a general answer, and so that's what I was looking for. And Ms. Simpson is the expert. I'm sure we do have to take into account industry and public versus private. But I was just trying to gauge what the kind of number we should be striving for.
Well, we're probably in good shape, 4% versus under 10. 4 is.
Well, no, it looks like in some departments it's 17%.
Yeah, we're types of job. That's I got you. Yes. Okay. So our next presentation is healthcare.
So I'll turn it over to Christina Fath, who's our HR benefits manager, unless I'm turning it to Sheila first. I'm not sure.
So Ryan, no, actually, you just introduced Christina, but I
Okay.
want to take time to recognize Christina. Christina is the benefits manager for the City of Charlotte, and many of you know her personally because she helps with benefits for you. And I just wanted to introduce her because she often doesn't come and speak at this workshop, but I will turn it over to Christina, and she will talk about our health care.
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. It's a pleasure to be here today outside of annual enrollment, which we know is everyone's favorite time of year here at the city when you get to select all of your benefits. So in today's presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the enhancements we've had over the previous 4 or 5 years, what we're seeing in terms of claims, drivers, and cost, and then turn it back over to Ryan to talk about funding considerations for the future. So this slide here has a lot of information on it and probably breaks every rule of PowerPoint. However, I will tell you everything on here is great news. And under your leadership and direction, we have had 4 solid years of enhancements in benefits for employees. So there are a variety of things listed here. The first thing that often comes to mind are the financial impacts of benefits. We've been able to keep premiums flat, and in some cases actually reduce health plan premiums and out-of-pocket expenses for employees through their deductibles, their co-pays, and their out-of-pocket maximums, saving them money. And as you recall, about 6 years ago, you took a giant step forward and approved the Marathon Health My Clinic for city employees. That has by far been one of the best benefits I'd say the city has offered in the last 20 years at least. But over the last 4 years, we've been able to build upon that model and add in behavioral health services, which have been very timely given the state of affairs over the last 2 years. We've also been able to add an additional location, providing more access to our employees and their families in the Matthews area, as well as add in physical therapy within the past year, which has been a highly valued benefit to employees. So again, thank you for your leadership and the opportunity to provide this good news and these positive benefits to employees. So the vision of the clinic when you approved that benefit 6 years ago was to provide access for employees to medical care that was low or no cost. And the intent was that if we could get employees and their families to use the clinic, not only would we improve health outcomes, but we would also improve our healthcare trend. And this slide shows exactly that. So if you look at the national trend of total medical claims increases since 2013, nationally we're at 61%. But here at the City of Charlotte, we're at 27%. So we've had much success with that clinic model and keeping our increases relatively low compared to national averages. Looking specifically at our medical trend experience, the green in this chart is the City of Charlotte medical trend, and the purple is the national trend. So you can see over the past 9 years, we have been better than the national trend. In the middle of that chart, the 2017, 18, 19 period, we were actually negative trend. And this was due to the choice strategy that we implemented on the health plans. So we implemented 5 health plan options, giving employees the opportunity to pick the plan that best met their need. But also this is due to the implementation of those health clinics. You're probably wondering what happened in 2021. We are above trend nationally in 2021. Of course, some of that is due to COVID, although all employers experienced that COVID uptick. What we're experiencing in the last year contributing to this are an increase in high-cost claimants. So those are medical plan members who have expenses over $500,000. Some of those are related to COVID, but some of them are not. And we have had several that are over $1 million. So that's really what that spike is in 2021. We do anticipate in 2022 that that is going to flatten out again. Those high-cost claimants, they come and go in a health plan. There's no way to predict when they're going to happen. but we have reserves in place for years that they do, because we know they're going to happen. You'll see a similar story on the pharmacy experience, where, again, that purple is national and the green is the city. So in that middle period, when we implemented the new health plan strategy as well as the clinics, we saw a negative trend. We also had some very competitive pharmacy rebid contract negotiations in that period, which helped the plan. But much like the medical plan, as you move to the right and you look into 2021, you see a significant increase over the national trend. This is due to a couple of factors. There are more people on our plan taking medications, and the medications that they are taking have become more expensive, specifically driven around specialty pharmacy. So specialty pharmacy accounts for over 50% of our prescription drug cost and impacts about 2% of our plan members. So the average claims cost for a member on specialty medications is about $350,000 a year. So these are very expensive medications, although they don't impact a lot of members. However, they are health enhancing, and oftentimes they're life-saving for our employees. So that's what's driving the 2021 increase, which again, we do expect to level off somewhat moving into the next plan year. If you are curious about our top 10 health conditions, we've laid them out here for you. Of the top 10 conditions, 9 of them increased in 2021 over 2020. The only one that did not have an increase is cancer, which is good news. However, all the categories did increase. Those highlighted in purple there, the preventive and administrative, as well as the pulmonology, these are the 2 categories that have our COVID claims in them. So as you move over to the right, you'll see, we've had a significant increase in the cost of those claims in 2021, with an impact of about $9 million in COVID claims for 2020 and 2021. So this data here, that $9 million total figure for COVID claims, that was about mid-January. I will say we've continued to see an uptick in claims just in the last 2 weeks due to the Omicron variant that hit right there at the holidays. So there's a little bit of trickle effect. I anticipate we'll continue to see those claims go up, but then level off just like it has in the population. So we talked about what's driving the cost. Here's a slide that will show you how we actually pay for all of those costs. So high level, we have 2 buckets, one for employees and one for retirees. And the money that goes into those buckets are the premiums that the employees and the retirees pay for their insurance. And then the employer contribution goes in those buckets. So all of that money sits in that bucket, and that's how we pay those claims costs. We do have an additional reserve that we're required to have, and that takes care of situations where we have higher claims than normal, or we want to fund benefit enhancements. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Ryan, who will talk you through that reserve fund and next steps.
Thanks, Christina. So the question would be asked, why is this something that we'd be talking about at a workshop when typically the last few years we have not talked about health care? And that's because after all of that good MyClinic experience, we were able to do a lot of good things, keep premiums or reduce premiums, improve plans, and you'll see we still beat the national average in claims enough through 17 through 20 that we were consistently increasing the fund balance that's in the healthcare fund. But with that last increase last year in medical costs and the projection this year, we're getting to a point now where we need to talk about an investment in healthcare so that we can kind of come in for a soft landing and stabilize the fund. I don't think it's important that we don't have any loss in FY23. This is what you're supposed to use fund balances and internal service funds for. But it's important that we make an investment so that over 23, 24, 25, it stabilizes and potentially starts to go up a little bit. So what does that look like? So what that means is it would be ideal for us, including enterprise funds, including employees, potentially, if we talked about a $7 to $10 million increase, depending on the next few months of claims data. I would want to put something in the room potentially if there might be an appetite. Christina mentioned that over the last few years, there has been quite a bit of COVID costs. There could be an opportunity, if council is willing down the road, to talk about utilizing a portion of those ARPA funds to try to bridge the gap and stabilize it. And it would be warranted because it would essentially be paying for COVID costs and helping mitigate the impact on employees, perhaps. So that's some of the discussions. Anytime that you're paying additional dollars for the same benefit, it's not a great thing. However, we've had so much success with healthcare and clinics over the last 5 or 6 years that we were really due that it finally became time that we do need to make an additional investment. So I'll stop there for questions for Christina or myself.
As you were talking about the fund balance, I was looking at the COVID cost of $9 million and then saw the projection or the comment from 7 to 10, and I think the ARPA fund, or at that point really I wrote down, could this come from the federal money from COVID? And I think that should be a strong consideration. We have done so well, I think 70% to 60% going out to community-facing issues, as Sean would say. Community-facing, I'm really loving that word, or that sentence, the way he put that together. But we've also invested in a lot of our employees, and I think that to have this increase, especially if the projections, Christine, if those are projections that we think that we could take care of that spike, that's something I give serious consideration. So I know that I've gotten out there in front of Mr. Driggs, and I should have said, Mr. Driggs, what should I be thinking about?
Thank you, Mayor. On page 7, that's a per member per month. Is that right? Is what the numbers represent in those columns?
Yes, that is.
So how many members are there in total? Sorry if you mentioned that. I didn't see it.
Yeah, it's about 16,000.
So that's employees and dependents and others. Does that include retirees?
It does include our pre-65 non-Medicare eligible retirees, yes.
Right, and they are funded from that separate fund, though. I was just going to say on the subject of ARPA and COVID, if we have non-recurring COVID-related expenses that we can point to, I think there's a good case for using the federal money to restore that because that's what it's for. And that would be within the 11 million, or if necessary, we revisit the 11 million. But I think it would be perfectly normal for us to absorb any excess charges that are, non-recurring in nature, i.e. during the peak, during this the pandemic. So I don't know, could that be done within the 11 million that we intend out of those funds? Or would it require, if we wanted to do that, reapportioning that money?
So, Mr. Driggs, I believe Ryan was alluding to the next 71 million, and which outside of, arts and culture, there are no calls for any of those funds. So as we start to think about the community-facing portion of it versus what would be, let's call it internal, we're suggesting that should be something we consider.
And could we restore some money that was taken out of the trust fund for COVID, specifically for COVID previously, or would we then only be able to do that prospectively?
So it would essentially, what it would do is it would allow a little bit more padding in the fund, which would give us a little bit more time to make up the any year-to-year losses that we're experiencing. I should also mention there are some timing restrictions on ARPA, so it wouldn't be a number as high as 9 million because that's I believe that's 2020 through 2022. So it would be a lesser number than that, but it would certainly be in the millions that would be potentially ARPA eligible.
All right, so I would just say I think we should do that. It strikes me as very appropriate and reduces the burden that we have to place on employees and our general fund. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Mr. Driggs. I think we agree, and now that I've got my instructions right, and I should say that. So, Mr. Winston.
Yes, thank you. My question is about the fund balance as well. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't have or can't get any kind of further guidance as to, how to judge when we should perhaps put more towards this fund balance and when we don't have enough. Because, well, I certainly take Mr. Bergman's word that, we should consider putting more in. We still do have a fund balance of $20.5 million. Understanding that there might be future times when we have to draw down on it. When does that, become a concern? On the flip side, thinking about, it was good that we had so much in it when we, ran into this global pandemic. But are we able to kind of gauge when we're saying, hey, maybe we do have enough in the fund balance to deal with a shock, this budget year and in the future year X, we might consider redirecting that money that would go to the fund balance to perhaps paying down premiums or something like that. I don't think we have a good way of judging that other than your word. So maybe that's, again, a conversation we can have offline.
Yeah, and we can certainly try to get you some information from Teresa's staff as well. Just to understand it a little bit, to compare it to our 16%, roughly 2 months reserve in the general fund. In this fund, that would be about $17 million would be the 2-month reserve. So we would still be a little bit above it through this year. My only concern on like a 5-year trend is that whatever decisions are made, it's not put into a point where you fall off a cliff where suddenly you have to increase it by 25% in 1 year or something to that effect. But yeah, definitely we can have more discussion and information for you on that.
And to your point, Councilmember Winston, I started to, I don't know what the right word is, get a little concerned when this thing was reaching $50 million. But we're fortunate that we had such a balance, because if we were around the 17 million mark and then COVID came, we would be having a very different discussion.
Absolutely.
Mayor, could I comment on that too?
Mr. Winston, Mr. Driggs wants to follow up on that? If you're done, Mr. Winston? Okay. Mr. Driggs?
Thank you. I just want to point out the proper comparison is not our general fund. The appropriate balance is a function of the volatility in claims. And given the spike that we saw in 2021, I think a higher reference is probably appropriate for the balance in here. And the other thing is that we need to stabilize this thing. So we need to decide what level we want to be at, and then we need to design our premium structure and so on in such a way as to have a reasonable expectation of maintaining that balance.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Driggs. Any other questions from council? Any other questions? So, Mr. Jones, Mr. Bergman, is that a wrap up? So our next budget meeting is March the 9th. Remember to send in your questions to Ms. Harris and copy the manager on them. And this meeting is adjourned. Have a good afternoon, everyone.